Ambassador Summon Park walked slowly through the cold metal corridors of New Geneva Station. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she moved toward the medical bay. Behind the sealed doors, her 15-year-old daughter Nari lay on a table, covered by a white sheet. The girl would never laugh again, never run through their garden on Earth, never graduate from the academy she had dreamed of attending. The station felt different now. What had once seemed like a symbol of peace between worlds now felt like a tomb. Summon stopped outside the medical bay door and pressed her palm against the cold metal. Through the small window, she could see the outline of her daughter's small body. Ambassador Park. The voice behind her was gentle but firm. Commander Kiwoo Lim approached with careful steps, his face grave. He had been the head of human security on the station for 3 years. Summon had watched him grow from a nervous young officer into a man who understood the delicate balance of keeping humans safe in alien space. "Show me again," Summon said without turning around. Her voice was steady, but Kiwoo could hear the storm brewing beneath the surface. They walked to his small office. The walls were covered with monitors showing different sections of the station. Kiwoo pulled up a chair for the ambassador, but she remained standing. He activated the main screen and began playing the security footage from 3 hours ago. The diplomatic quarter had been hosting a cultural exchange event. Representatives from 12 different alien species had gathered to demonstrate their ceremonial weapons and traditions. It was supposed to be educational, a way for different cultures to learn about each other. Nari had been there with her youth group, a dozen human teenagers who were part of an exchange program. They stood to one side, watching with wide eyes as the Vraxian delegate showed off his people's ancient plasma rifle. The weapon was beautiful in its own way, carved from some kind of crystal that glowed within a light. Thexus Prime, the Vraxian representative, was a tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms. He spoke in his species' typical harsh tone as he explained how his ancestors had used such weapons to hunt the great beasts of their homeworld. The other delegates listened politely, some taking notes on their personal devices. Then something changed. Thexus Prime's large black eyes focused on the group of human children. He said something in his own language that made several other aliens laugh. The translation system picked up his words, "Such small, weak creatures. How did they ever survive long enough to reach space?" Nari had stepped forward slightly, perhaps trying to get a better view of the weapon. She was always curious about other cultures, always asking questions about how things worked. It was one of the things Summon loved most about her daughter. Thexus Prime raised his weapon. For a moment, it seemed like he was simply adjusting his grip. But then his movements became deliberate, purposeful. The weapon's crystal core began to glow brighter. "Let this be a lesson about human fragility," he said clearly in perfect standard galactic. The plasma bolt hit Nari in the chest. The energy weapon, designed to kill creatures the size of Earth elephants, completely destroyed her small human body. The other children screamed and ran. Several adult humans rushed forward, but it was already too late. The recording showed the reactions of the other alien delegates. Some seemed shocked, but others appeared amused. A few were already activating their communication devices, probably sending messages about what they had witnessed. None of them moved to help. None of them called for medical assistance. They simply watched as human security personnel arrived and tried desperately to save a child who was already gone. The video ended. Summon stood in silence for a long moment, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "The official report," she asked. Kiwoo pulled up another document on his screen. Equipment malfunction during routine demonstration. Accidental discharge. No criminal intent found. The Galactic Council's investigation team concluded their work in less than 2 hours. And Thexus Prime? Claims diplomatic immunity. The Vraxian government supports him. They say the weapon misfired and that any suggestion of deliberate action is an insult to their people. General Do-yoon Kim entered the office without knocking. He was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands from his years as a soldier before becoming a diplomat. His face was red with anger. "The council just voted," he said. 41 in favor of accepting the official report. Only the human delegation voted against it. They're calling it a closed matter. Summon finally sat down. She looked older than her 50 years, the weight of loss and rage aging her before their eyes. But when she spoke, her voice was completely calm. "They think we're weak," she said quietly. "They killed my daughter to prove a point about human weakness. They want us to know our place in their galactic order." Kiwoo and Do-yoon exchanged glances. They had both served in the Human Defense Forces before joining the Diplomatic Corps. They knew that beneath humanity's peaceful exterior lay something much more dangerous. "What are your orders, Ambassador?" Do-Yoon asked. Summon stood and walked to the window that looked out into space. Hundreds of ships moved between the stations and planets of Council space. Millions of aliens went about their daily lives, secure in the knowledge that they were the dominant powers in the galaxy. Recall all human civilians from Council space, she said. Quietly. No announcements, no explanations. Just get our people out. And then? Summon's reflection smiled in the dark glass, but it was not a pleasant expression. Then we remind them what happens when you hurt our children. The great doors of the Galactic Assembly Hall opened with a deep rumbling sound. Ambassador Summon Park walked through them alone, her black diplomatic robes flowing behind her. The hall was enormous, big enough to hold representatives from 43 different worlds. The ceiling stretched so high above that it disappeared into darkness, and the walls curved outward like the inside of a giant egg. Hundreds of alien eyes turned to watch her as she walked down the central aisle. Most of them looked bored. Humans were always complaining about something, always making speeches about fairness and justice. The other species had learned to simply wait for these moments to pass. The Vraxian delegation sat in their special section near the front. Their silver skin gleamed under the bright lights, and their forearms moved constantly as they whispered to each other. Thexus Prime sat in the center of their group, looking completely relaxed. He had killed a human child 3 days ago, and now he was going to listen to the child's mother beg for justice that would never come. The Altarian representatives shifted in their seats, their blue skin changing color slightly with their mood. They found human emotions amusing but tiresome. The Zephyrians made clicking sounds with their beaks, discussing among themselves whether this speech would be worth listening to. Summon reached the central podium and placed her hands on its smooth surface. The whole sound system picked up even her breathing and made it echo through the vast space. She looked up at the assembled aliens, her face completely calm. Honored members of the council, she began. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying easily to every corner of the hall. 3 days ago, you murdered my daughter. The sound that followed was like wind through leaves. Hundreds of aliens began talking at once, some laughing, others making sounds of disapproval. The Vraxian delegation was loudest of all. Really, Ambassador, Thexus Prime called out, not bothering to wait for permission to speak. We understand that human emotions often cloud your judgment. Perhaps it would be better if your species focused on learning proper galactic protocols instead of making baseless accusations. Several other delegates made sounds of agreement. The Kandorian representative clicked his mandibles in what his species considered polite laughter. The Yeltaran delegate waved her tentacles in a gesture that meant how foolish. Summon waited for the noise to die down. Her expression did not change at all. When the hall was quiet again, she continued speaking. For 10,000 years, my people have been warriors, she said. We conquered our homeworld not through superior technology, but through superior violence. Some of the laughter stopped. Captain Jinwoo Han, sitting with the small human delegation, watched as alien faces began to change. He had served in the Human Defense Forces for 15 years before becoming a diplomat. He knew the history that Summon was about to share, and he knew that most aliens had never bothered to learn it. Every advancement in human civilization came after we had perfected the art of killing, Summon continued. We learned to make fire because we needed to cook the meat of animals we hunted. We learned to work metal because we needed better weapons. We learned to build ships because we needed to cross oceans to find new enemies to fight. The hall was getting quieter now. The Altarian delegate had stopped changing colors and was listening carefully. Even some of the Vraxians had stopped laughing. We created agriculture so we could feed armies. We invented writing so we could record our victories and plan our wars. We developed mathematics so we could calculate the trajectory of our weapons. Every tool, every invention, every idea that lifted us from animals to spacefaring beings came from our need to be better at destroying our enemies. The silence was almost complete now. Summon's voice seemed to fill every empty space in the enormous hall. For 10,000 years, we fought each other. We burned cities, poisoned rivers, and turned entire continents into graveyards. We created weapons that could kill from across oceans and diseases that could wipe out entire populations. We became so good at war that we nearly destroyed our own planet 3 different times. Ambassador Thexus Prime was no longer smiling. His black eyes were fixed on the human woman, and his forearms had gone very still. We learned restraint because we had to, Summon said. We created rules for warfare because without them, we would have destroyed everything. We chose cooperation because the alternative was extinction. Not just our extinction. Everyone's extinction. She paused and looked directly at the Vraxian delegation. When we reached space and met you, we made a choice. We decided to be peaceful. We decided to use words instead of weapons. We decided to build instead of destroy. You have lived your entire lives thinking that this choice made us weak. The hall was so quiet that the soft hum of the air recycling system seemed loud. You have killed a human child and refused justice, Summon continued. You mistake our restraint for weakness. You think that because we choose peace, we have forgotten war. She leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the podium. This is your final warning. I suggest you pray to whatever gods you worship. Pray that you find a way to make this right before my species decides that justice must be taken rather than given. Summon stepped back from the podium and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the perfect silence. Every alien in the hall watched her go, and many of them were beginning to realize that they might have made a terrible mistake. As the doors closed behind her, the hall erupted in nervous chatter. But some of the older delegates, those who had studied human history, sat very still and very quiet. They were remembering old stories about a species that had turned warfare into an art form before they learned to make peace. And they were starting to be afraid. Dr. Mioncho rubbed her tired eyes and looked at her computer screen again. The small office aboard the research ship Soul's Pride was barely big enough for her desk and chair, but it was quiet and private. Perfect for the work she was doing now. Numbers and charts filled her screen, showing details about human ships and stations that most aliens had never bothered to study. She took a sip of cold coffee and shook her head. If the Galactic Council had looked at this information even once, they never would have laughed at Ambassador Park's warning. The door to her office opened with a soft hiss. Captain Hyok Lee stepped inside, ducking slightly to fit through the doorway. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of steady expression that came from years of commanding ships in dangerous space. "What have you found?" he asked, pulling up the room's only other chair. Mion turned her screen so he could see it better. "Look at this. The Council keeps detailed records of every ship that enters their space. They have complete files on our colony vessels, our merchant ships, our exploration craft. But they completely misunderstood what they were looking at." She pulled up a schematic of a typical human colony ship. It looked peaceful enough from the outside, like a giant metal egg with engines attached to the back. But when she highlighted the internal structure, a different picture emerged. "This is the New Busan, a colony ship that carried 50,000 people to the Kepler system last year," she said. "The Council classified it as a civilian transport. But look at these power readings." Captain Lee leaned forward. "That's enough energy output to run a military base." "Exactly. And look at these sections here." She pointed to several areas of the ship that were marked in red. "Mining charges. Enough explosive power to break apart asteroids the size of small moons. The Council thinks we carry them for terraforming work." "Which we do," the captain said slowly. "But asteroids aren't the only things they can break apart." Mion nodded and brought up another file. "Every single human colony ship carries the same equipment. Planetary crackers, atmospheric processors, gravity manipulators. All of it designed for building new worlds. All of it perfectly capable of destroying existing ones." She switched to a different display showing human merchant vessels. "And these ships that the aliens think are just carrying trade goods? Look at their construction specifications." Captain Lee whistled softly. The merchant ships were built like fortresses. Their hulls were thick enough to survive direct hits from military-grade weapons. Their engines were powerful enough to outrun most alien warships. And their cargo holds could be quickly converted to carry troops and military equipment. "They build them in the same shipyards where we used to make battleships," Mion continued. "Using the same techniques, the same materials, the same designs. The only difference is what we put inside them." The captain was quiet for a moment, studying the information. "They think our patrol ships are our warships. That's the biggest mistake of all." Mion pulled up specifications for a human patrol craft. It was small compared to the colony ships, designed to carry maybe 50 crew members. The aliens see these and think they represent our military strength. But these aren't warships at all. "They are police boats," Captain Lee said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Exactly. The ships we send to patrol trade routes and protect civilian traffic are the equivalent of Coast Guard cutters. We use them for law enforcement, rescue operations, and dealing with pirates. The Council has never seen an actual human warship." Mion opened a new file, and both of them stared at the screen in silence. The schematic showed a massive vessel, far larger than anything currently in service with any alien military. "The Sejong-class battleship," she said quietly. 16 kilometers long. built around a main gun that could punch a hole through a moon. Designed to fight entire fleets by itself. How many were built? Officially? None. We decommissioned the entire class after the Unification Wars ended. As far as the galactic community knows, ships like this never existed. Captain Lee smiled grimly. But unofficially? They're in deep storage. Mothballed but maintained. We could have them operational again in a matter of weeks if we needed to. Outside the small porthole in Mion's office, space looked peaceful. Stars twinkled in the distance, and the lights of various space stations dotted the darkness. But hidden in asteroid fields and remote systems throughout human space, dozens of massive warships waited in silence. Meanwhile, on council worlds throughout the galaxy, alien intelligence officers were frantically trying to understand something that suddenly seemed very important. Why did human diplomatic ships carry enough weapons to fight off an entire pirate fleet? Why were human exploration vessels built like mobile fortresses? Why did every human settlement, no matter how small, have defensive systems that could protect against orbital bombardment? Commander Zephyx of Altarian intelligence stared at his own computer screen, reviewing intercepted communications from human space. The messages were encoded, but his people had broken human encryption years ago. What he was reading made his blue skin turn pale. Human civilian contractors were quietly being recalled from alien worlds. Human research stations were activating dormant defensive systems. Human merchant vessels were changing course toward predetermined rally points. And deep in human space, in shipyards that the aliens had thought were abandoned, massive construction projects were beginning. The humans were building something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. Or perhaps they were waking up something old, something the galaxy had forgotten was possible. Commander Zephyx reached for his communication device with a trembling hand. His superiors needed to know that humanity's idea of peaceful still involved enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. The revelation was terrifying. They had never seen humanity at war. The message came at exactly midnight, station time. Director J1 Park of the Human Diplomatic Corps sent it from his office on Earth, but it reached every human civilian in council space within minutes. The message was simple: family emergency. Return home immediately. Within hours, something strange began happening across the galaxy. Human teachers at alien schools suddenly remembered urgent personal matters that required them to return to Earth. Human engineers working on space stations received emergency calls from relatives. Human doctors treating alien patients got news of sick family members who needed their care. They left quietly, without fuss or explanation. They packed their few belongings, said polite goodbyes, and boarded the next transport ships heading toward human space. Most aliens barely noticed. Humans came and went all the time, and there were always more to replace them. But then the problems started. The first sign was the navigation systems. Trade routes that had worked perfectly for decades suddenly began showing errors. Computer systems that calculated jump coordinates started giving impossible readings. Ships found themselves light years off course, drifting in empty space with no idea how they had gotten there. The quantum communication relays were next. These massive devices allowed instant communication across vast distances, connecting the far edges of the galaxy in a network of information. Most aliens assumed they were maintained by automated systems. They had no idea that teams of human technicians regularly serviced the delicate equipment, making tiny adjustments that kept the entire network functioning. Without those adjustments, the relays began to fail. First one, then another, then entire sections of the galactic communication grid went dark. Worlds that had been in constant contact for centuries suddenly found themselves isolated and alone. On Kepler Station, Councillor Brix Nexa was working late in his private study. The Zephyrian was reviewing trade agreements when all the lights in his room suddenly went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. He reached for his communication device to call maintenance, but the device was dead. The computer on his desk showed nothing but static. Even his door controls were not responding. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the small room. "Is anyone there?" The lights came back on. Normal power had been restored. But Councillor Nexa was gone. His chair was pushed back as if he had stood up quickly. Papers were scattered across his desk. But there was no sign of where he had gone or how he had left. Detective Minji Song arrived at the scene 3 hours later. She was one of the few human security officers still working on alien stations, and her expertise in impossible crimes had made her valuable to the Council's investigation teams. She worked with Investigator Qualix, an insect-like Kandorian with excellent analytical skills. Together, They examined every inch of the study. The door was locked from the inside, Qualix reported, his mandibles clicking as he spoke. The computer shows no record of it being opened. The ventilation shafts are too small for anyone to crawl through. The walls are solid metal. Minji nodded, but her attention was focused on something else. On the desk, placed carefully on top of the scattered papers, was a single white flower. She recognized it immediately, a chrysanthemum, the traditional Korean flower of death and remembrance. There was someone else here, she said quietly. Impossible, Qualix replied. The security recordings show Counselor Nexa alone the entire time. No one entered or left this room. But Minji was thinking about the power failure. 3 minutes of darkness, just long enough for someone to do what needed to be done. Someone who knew exactly when the lights would go out and when they would come back on. The second disappearance happened 12 hours later on Harmony Point, a neutral station where aliens went for meditation and spiritual guidance. Magistrate Ural Thrim had been alone in his private chamber, following his daily prayer routine. The maintenance crew found him the next morning. He was sitting in his meditation pose, but he was dead. No wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had killed him. And on the small altar in front of him, another white chrysanthemum. Captain Seojun Park stood in the command center of his ship, watching reports flow in from across Council space. He was not related to Ambassador Sumin Park, but he understood what was happening better than most. His ship was officially a research vessel, but it carried more weapons than most alien warships. Another one, his communications officer reported. Senator Vextar of the Altarian Assembly. Found dead in his secured apartment on New Geneva Station. Same situation, locked room, no evidence of intrusion, no explanation for death. That makes 5 in 2 days, his tactical officer said. Sir, how are they doing this? We're monitoring every human ship in Council space. None of them are anywhere near these locations when the deaths occur. Captain Seojun smiled grimly. That's because you're looking for ships. Humans don't need ships for everything. The realization hit his bridge crew like a cold wind. For 30 years, humans had been part of the galactic community. They had spread throughout Council space as engineers, doctors, teachers, researchers, and diplomats. They had access to every major station, every secure facility, every protected world. They maintained the life support systems. They repaired the computers. They worked in the hospitals and schools. They had become so common, so trusted, that most aliens had stopped noticing them. And now those same humans were systematically eliminating every alien official who had voted to deny justice for Nari Park. They weren't coming from outside the system as invading fleets. They were already inside, and they had been there all along. The emergency alarm rang through the Galactic Assembly Hall at 4 in the morning, station time. Council members rushed from their quarters, some still wearing sleeping clothes, others pulling on their formal robes as they hurried through the corridors. The great hall that usually took hours to fill was packed within 30 minutes. Councillor Vextar of the Altarian Assembly stood at the emergency podium, his blue skin darker than usual with stress. His voice shook as he spoke to the assembled representatives. In 7 days, 12 of our colleagues have died, he announced. 12 high-ranking officials from across Council space. All found dead in locked rooms with no explanation for how they died or who killed them. The hall erupted in nervous chatter. Representatives who had been laughing at human threats just a week ago now looked around with fearful eyes. Many seats were empty. Some council members had quietly left for their home worlds, claiming urgent business that couldn't wait. This is terrorism. Vextar continued, his voice growing louder. The humans are using some kind of invisible weapon, some technology we don't understand. They must be stopped before they kill us all. The Zephyrian delegate raised one of his 4 arms. What evidence do we have that humans are responsible? Perhaps this is some kind of disease, or a natural phenomenon we haven't seen before. The evidence is on every crime scene, replied Security Chief Tomax, projecting images onto the main screen. At each location, investigators found a single white flower. A human flower called a chrysanthemum. In their culture, it represents death and remembrance. The images showed the same scene repeated 12 times, alien officials dead in locked rooms, and always the small white flower placed carefully where it would be found. We demand an immediate investigation, the Condorian representative declared, clicking his mandibles nervously. All human nationals should be detained and questioned. Their ships should be searched. Their communications should be monitored. There was a murmur of agreement from around the hall. But then a calm voice spoke from the human delegation section. You may certainly try. Director Yoonji Kim of Human Intelligence stood slowly. She was a small woman with gray hair and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of dealing with dangerous situations. Around her sat the few remaining human representatives who hadn't been recalled to Earth. But you should know, she continued, that there are currently 43,000 humans living and working throughout Council space. They are the engineers who maintain your life support systems. They are the doctors treating your sick. They are the teachers educating your children. The hall became very quiet. Many council members were beginning to realize something they had never thought about before: humans were everywhere in their society. They are also, Director Kim said, the descendants of a species that spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war before we learned to make peace. Every human child learns history, including the complete record of every war, every battle, every method of killing that our ancestors developed over 10 millennia of constant warfare. Captain Taehyung Cho leaned forward in his seat. He was a younger man with the kind of steady gaze that made other species uncomfortable. We told you to pray. Did you think we were speaking metaphorically? The truth hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. They had assumed that the killings were being carried out by some kind of special forces, some elite human military unit that had somehow infiltrated Council space. But the reality was much more terrifying. Humanity hadn't sent soldiers or warships. They had simply reminded their own people what they were capable of when pushed too far. The human doctor treating patients in the hospital. The human engineer fixing the air recycling system. The human teacher reading stories to alien children. Any of them could be the killer. All of them could be the killer. The communication from Earth arrived exactly at midnight on the 7th day. The main screen in the assembly hall flickered to life, showing Ambassador Sumin Park sitting at a simple desk. Behind her, the blue and green Earth turned slowly in space. Honored members of the Council, she said, her voice calm and clear. 7 days ago, I warned you that my people would seek justice for my daughter's murder. You chose to ignore that warning. The hall was completely silent. Even the usual background hum of the air recycling system seemed to have stopped. The individuals responsible for my daughter's death, and every council member who voted to protect them, will be delivered to Earth for trial. You have 72 hours to comply with this demand. Thexus Prime, the Vraxian who had killed Nari Park, stood up slowly. His forearms were shaking, and his usual arrogance was gone. And if we refuse? He asked, though his voice was barely above a whisper. Ambassador Park's expression didn't change. Then we will remind the galaxy why apex predators don't usually choose mercy. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in perfect silence. The representatives sat frozen in their seats, each one thinking about the same terrible question: how many humans were on their home worlds right now? The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Some wanted to fight, to call humanity's bluff and see what they were really capable of. Others wanted to negotiate, to find some middle ground that would satisfy human demands without losing face. But in the end, practical fear won over pride. 3 days later, a small human transport ship departed from New Geneva Station. In its cargo hold, 7 alien prisoners sat in holding cells, bound for Earth and human justice. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the most powerful interstellar government in known space surrendered to the demands of a species they had thought was weak. Nari Park was avenged, and the universe learned a lesson it would never forget: some lines should never be crossed, no matter who draws them.